Okay, so Fred, welcome back to the show, my friend. Look, I want to start out by saying you have been strong isn't even the right word for it. You've been an incredibly strong advocate for gun control since the tragic loss of your daughter, Jaime. Tell my listeners, how do you feel the recent shooting underscores the failures of current gun legislation in the United States? And of course, I'm talking about the shooting at the school in Georgia.
Yeah. Well, so I'll answer that two ways. It actually gets to the heart of what we know works and what we know doesn't. And unfortunately, in Georgia, they refused to do what we know works. For example, there were no red flag laws in Georgia. Heck, the sheriff had no idea if that teenager was even allowed to walk publicly with his gun or not, because Georgia is a free-for-all. Unfortunately, they have no safe storage laws either in Georgia. Now, that might not have stopped that dad. That dad was very unique, and I am glad he's now sitting in a prison cell. The good news is, what we have been doing the past few years, we do know works. We've passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. We now have an Office of Gun Violence Prevention led out of the White House by Vice President Kamala Harris. And we've seen historic, dramatic reductions in gun violence in America. We do know what works. Unfortunately, you have states like Georgia that have refused to do it.
Yeah, which makes absolutely no sense. I don't understand why politicians do not see this issue as clearly as you, as I, as so many Americans that are just sick and tired. When you hear the statistic that the number one killer of children, and you tell them that it's gun violence as opposed to sickness, to cancer, they don't believe you. But the numbers don't lie. That's the whole point. And yet you have the other person who is seeking the office of the presidency of the United States, and I'm talking about Donald von Schitzenpants. He is consistently with his MAGA moron friends opposed
Maggots.
They have opposed stricter gun control measures, including something as simple as background checks. So my question to you, Fred, is what specific policies of his do you believe have worsened the gun violence crisis in America?
Oh, that's a great question. And let me just say this. Listen, there's a lot of really great people in the world of politics. They're not all bad people, even though it serves some devious beliefs or purposes to suggest they are. There's some really great people. However, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are not amongst that group. They are damaged. They are demented. And when they get more worked up over a lie about dogs being eaten in Ohio than they did about 4 people getting killed in Georgia last week, you get to see for yourself. There's no chance they will ever do the right thing on this issue. It's all political and it's all dangerous with them. The first thing Donald Trump did when he was president, the first thing was an executive action to make it easier for those with mental illness to go out and get guns, while at the same time screaming, we need to do more about mental illness. That's what's behind all the shootings. Now, he has since evolved by blaming all the shootings on those crossing the southern border, even though he was shot by a supporter in Georgia, who was a teenage American male, by the way. But everything he says is a lie. Everything he says about his only job is to defend the Second Amendment, when, by the way, the Second Amendment is not at risk, is dangerous. Everything he does on this issue is wrong. And so my hope for every decent American who has people in their lives that they love, children, parents, friends, cousins, neighbors, people who you love, is that you stop listening to that damaged and demented liar and you look not just to vote for Kamala Harris right now and Tim Walz, because they are the ones who will do something about this, but that you will also commit to voting down ballot for decency and civility and people who they can work with who will do the right thing.
Right. I mean, that's all everybody's asking. But since you brought up Kamala, let me turn around and say that everything that I have read, everything that I know about her, to be truthful and accurate, is that she has continuously supported common sense gun reforms throughout her entire career, whether it was a prosecutor, as senator, as vice president, and she will do so as president of the United States. So in your view, Fred, are her current gun control proposals even strong enough, or do they fall short of what's actually needed to prevent future tragedies?
Listen, I'm going to get real personal here with you about her. And by the way, I don't call it gun control. I call it gun safety, gun violence prevention, because we're not trying to control anything. We're not trying to hurt any legal, lawful gun owner. We're trying to keep guns out of the hands of those who intend harm to themselves or others. But here's the thing about Vice President Harris. I worked with her while we were working on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. She is as decent and as straightforward on this as can be. And she wants to take on every pragmatic possible solution that we can. You mentioned it, background checks, red flag laws, doing something about PLCA, all of the things that we know will work. But she's also been leading the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, and they are doing tremendous work, not just responding to gun violence when it happens, but getting ahead of gun violence before it happens, and also reacting to the reality of gun violence in communities when it happens. But here's the personal thing, and it really gets to who she is as a person. Last year, when the state attorney in Florida was done with the building where my daughter was murdered, myself and one of the other Parkland parents decided to work with the state attorney and the school district to bring every elected person and everybody involved in safety and security around the country who wanted to walk through this building a chance to do so. We led multiple tours through this building. It is still an untouched crime scene. The blood is all still there. The bodily DNA is still there. All the coursework on the desks, as if the kids just walked away, is still there. The shards of glass, the bullet holes, all still there. And I tell you this because we led a lot of tours with a lot of people. I asked last December Kamala Harris personally if she would come walk that building with me. And I explained to her very clearly what that building was and the condition it was still in, to give her an out. I didn't expect the Vice President of the United States to say yes, but she did. She said she would come walk that building with me, that she needed to see it, to see the carnage, to see what led to it, and to take away the learnings of how we can stop the next one. Not just by passing additional gun violence prevention measures, but also rethinking how we design and build schools, for example. And over the course of the next few months of planning, I kept on saying to her and her staff, this is what this building is like. Are you sure you are up to this? And every time she said, I am going to come walk that building with you. We are not going to cancel. That's who she is. She is incredible. And Michael, back in March, she did. She brought the members of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. They walked that building with me and the Parkland families. And it's affecting now, going forward, how they think about gun safety and school safety. That's who she is.
Yep. So let me ask you this then, Fred. What do you see as somebody who was there right there on the floor of all of this bipartisan, hopeful legislation? What's the biggest challenge that you see to passing meaningful gun safety laws, particularly with the current political climate and the power of the gun lobby? What's the challenge?
It's a great question. So about 6 months ago, I actually made a decision to stop even trying to pass any laws through this Congress, because under the Republican leadership in the House, they are demented, they are damaged, they are not interested in anything useful to the American people. They have only one mission, and it's to try and restore and resurrect Donald Trump. And so for the past 6 months, and it is the biggest challenge, I've moved away from, advocacy and working with legislators to get stuff done to being a completely 100% political person focused completely on this election. Because this election is the defining point between getting things done that work for the American people, that will save lives, that will stop the next one, or actually losing the chance to ever do so again. This election is our chance to ensure another dad gets to continue watching his daughter dance, unlike me, because we did something more, or losing the chance permanently to do so. This election is about not restoring, but saving and maintaining democracy, so we get to work in a bipartisan way on things that truly matter to the American people, or not. It either goes forward or it full stops. I am not ready for a full stop, and I've gone all political because of it.
Listen, look, your story is a heartbreak. Nobody expects that you send your kid to school where it's supposed to be a safe zone, and the next thing you know, you get that shit call. That call that changes every second for the rest of your life. I can't even begin to imagine. And I cannot imagine how people like MAGA Mike Johnson, how people like Donald Trump, how people like the Jim Bag Jordan, the Marjorie Toilet Greens, the Lauren Holberts, the Josh Hawleys, the Matt fucking Gateses, how they can't take your story and internalize it to themselves, but instead feel it appropriate to wear an AR pin, lapel pin, as they walk through our house, the people's house, Congress. I don't understand why this issue is so difficult. And I'm with you, my brother. I believe, and I know in my heart of hearts, that if Kamala Harris and Tim Walz become president and vice president, and if we are, as you also rightly said, if we are successful in the down ballot, as we should be, to rid this country of these idiots, these fucking morons that don't want to work across the aisle, that it has become for them a zero-sum game. In order for us to win, you must lose, even if it means at the expense of our children. Yep. The only way to get meaningful gun safety, gun protection, gun control laws, you don't like the word, I do, is to make sure that up and down ballot goes Democrat, and they do this once and for all, where you get rid of these bump fucking stocks, they get rid of these AR-15s like they used to. It used to not be legal to own an AR or an AK-47. Plain and simple.
Listen, Michael, you mentioned a whole bunch of those demented people saying you don't understand. And I think you do understand because you know them. And I understand because I've gotten to know them. That is who they are. And so again, in my new approach, I'm done trying to figure them out. That they are demented. They're damaged people. And they need to be fired. Listen, any one of them has people in their life that they love, but they have chosen a path of deviance. They have chosen a path of putting everything that matters to the country aside, all for this guy. All just like it is insane. But you know what? Here's what they do understand, and this is the part that the key point here. What they all understand, that whole maggot group, is that 100% of them will vote. Donald Trump isn't even trying to appeal to anybody beyond that group. His only goal is to make sure 100% of them vote, because they are probably 30-something% of this country. And you know what? I believe 100% of them will vote. The crazier they get, the more it appeals to that group.
I want to be clear about something too. While Donald Trump has that MAGA group, which is between 38, they say possibly even 40% of the country, you cannot win a general election, no matter what. And I don't care what anybody says. You cannot win with 40% or 38% of the population behind you. Now, don't get me wrong. That's a shitload number of people, which is why he's taking in significant dollars from these dummies. But you cannot win a general election.
No, you can. And this is the key point, because I don't worry about them. I don't worry if he gets 100% of them to vote. I really don't. I worry about all of us and whether we all vote, because if we are divided and we don't vote, they can win. And that's the key thing. We need every Democrat. We need every Republican who realizes this isn't the party they want to be a part of anymore. And we need every independent to show up in numbers unlike anything ever seen. Now, I will tell you, the only chance of them dividing us going forward is if there's a way to cause depression amongst all of our voters that we can't win. I think right now everybody's feeling pretty optimistic, but you still got 60-ish days. Every day is going to be a dogfight. Dogs after last night, a dogfight every day. So keep fighting, keep working. Do what Taylor Swift said yesterday. Get yourself registered if you're not, and vote as early as you possibly can.
Yeah, let me be clear though. We're talking about right now under 55 days, right before the election. Just so, it goes real fast. But since we're talking about von Schitzenpants himself, the thing that I find most reprehensible is, as it relates to this issue, of course, is that he often frames gun control as a Second Amendment issue, arguing that any restrictions are an infringement on personal freedoms, something that he's not going to allow. I will not allow them to take away your Second Amendment. I'm your Second Amendment president, and so on. Bullshit. So my question to you, Fred, is how do you counter that narrative, especially when you're talking to gun rights activists or advocates?
You may or may not remember this. In his last State of the Union, I got arrested because he went on his Second Amendment rant, and I got up in the gallery. I was there as a guest of Nancy Pelosi, and I screamed out, "What about victims of gun violence like my daughter?" And for that, I was removed from the gallery, and I got arrested that night. And even though the next day the story should have been about his Second Amendment rant, the next day the story became one of a gun safety story because of what happened to me. So how do I counter it? By never shutting up, by never stopping to tell the truth, by writing a book like I did last year when I was on, called American Carnage. Just because they say it doesn't make it true. Just because they scream it angrily doesn't make it a fact. every single fucking day, I'm going to keep telling the truth and telling the truth about why it matters. And every day.
Question, I'm blown away. They actually arrested you.
Oh, yeah.
And they fingerprinted you. They put you through the process.
So
did you have
what
to
happened? No, I'll tell you what happened. I got up. It was, call it 2/3 into the speech when he went on the rant, and I got up and did this. And then I sat down, and Jose Andres, the chef, was sitting next to me. And a minute later, he taps me on the shoulder and he points, and there's the Secret Service. Now, just so you know, 3 rows behind us was Kim Guilfoyle, Bradley Pascal, who's the former campaign manager, and Rona McDaniel. They were hooting and hollering all night. Nobody said a thing. So as the Secret Service is standing there, Jose Andres is pointing to the 3 of them saying, what about them? What about them? Didn't matter. They take me out. They have me unload all my pockets. I didn't have a cell phone. It was back in Speaker Pelosi's office. And I asked if they can lend me a phone so I can call my wife so she doesn't panic. And they wouldn't. And then after asking me a few questions, they lead me through a corridor down to the basement of the building. I'm sure you know the basement. And there's a paddy wagon, like a steel-bodied truck with no windows that they put me in. And they cuffed me to the inside of that. And I thought I was going to end up at the bottom of the Potomac, to be honest. I just had no idea where I was going. I end up in a jail facility about 10 minutes away, handcuffed to a wall in there. And about an hour and a half, hour later, whatever it was, they finally bring me my cell phone, and I get to call my wife. They have never read me my Miranda rights yet, but I'm there. They never fingerprinted me, but I'm there, and I'm cuffed. And they're telling me I'm going to be interrogated over the course of the evening. But they didn't have a time frame for when the person who was going to do the interrogation was going to come, and that I am under arrest. But again, never read Miranda rights, never fingerprinted. And then about an hour after that, they come, they let me go. It turns out, immediately following the speech, Nancy Pelosi, remember she tore up that speech? She and Congressman Ted Deutsch, immediately following, they never went to Media Row. They got on the phone with the Capitol Police, and they arranged finally for my release. When I got out into the lobby, Speaker Pelosi's driver and a staff member were there waiting for me. We go into her car because she sent them in her vehicle, and her staff member says the speaker would like to speak with you.
So what is Lumen? Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or you're burning carbs. And it gives you a tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, your workouts, your sleep, something I need badly, and even stress management. So let me tell you how Lumen works. All you have to do is you breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fat or carbs. And then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on the measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after your workouts and your meals so that you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. So here's what Lumen does. Lumen provides crucial insights and helpful guidance for your lifestyle. It requires effort, though, and it also requires a lifestyle change to achieve results. Let me be clear. Lumen is not just a weight loss tool. It's about understanding and improving your metabolic health. So let me also tell you why metabolic health matters. It matters because your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food that you eat into fuel that keeps you going. Because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimum metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and better sleep. Lumen gives you recommendations to improve your metabolic health. It can also track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy through hormonal shifts so that you can keep up your energy and stave off cravings. So if you want to take the next step to improving your health, go right now to lumen.me/Cohen to get 15% off your Lumen. That's LUMEN.me/Cohen for 15% off your purchase. And thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode.
And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm in trouble. Because I was there as her guest. And I start, she comes up on Bluetooth. I start profusely apologizing. And she just said, what are you apologizing for? She goes, you spoke for America tonight. And she goes, I'm proud of you. And, it was a brutal, horrific night. But at the end of the day, the worst part of it was the pain I caused my family. And you and I have had personal conversations about that in the past. It's still something that I struggle with. But I am proud of the fact that the next day, people were focused on the idea of gun violence as something unlike what he intended.
I wonder if there's litigation against Secret Service or Trump for an illegal arrest. I wonder. First of all,
no idea. I never pursued it. I was just glad to be out.
I'm shocked that Pelosi didn't do more onto that, because let me be very clear about something that I know probably better, I think, than anybody in this entire country. As the first, and so far my understanding is the only political prisoner held by my own country, because I refused to waive my First Amendment constitutional right. And I refused not to publish my first book, Disloyal. You could possibly be part of that group also. You see, when you have an authoritarian like Donald Trump, who doesn't like the fact that Fred Guttenberg stood up during his State of the Union speech and yelled out, what about the victims? What about the children? Right? What about their rights? That was enough to set off this maniac to have Secret Service go ahead and to turn around and to have you incarcerated and to have you taken, handcuffed to a wall, which sounds to me eerily similar to the unconstitutional remand that I went through. The only difference for me is they actually booked me, they processed me, and they kept me in solitary confinement for another 16 days. Making it a total of 51 days in solitary.
Unbelievable. But here's why, Michael, it's so important that people like you and me don't shut up and say it as loudly as we can, because what happened to us will be the norm. He's said it this week.
Right. That's exactly my point. What happened? My goal, the same as yours. Why is it that you're out there putting yourself front and center?
Because I love this country.
Because you loved your daughter. Because you love
my daughter.
And because you love children. Everyone's children. Republican, Democrat, or independent makes no difference. A child is a child. And the plague that we are now inflicting on children, on our children, needs to stop. And so you've become an advocate, even if that means being taken in a paddy wagon and brought somewhere and harassed by Secret Service. My comment that I had said both to Stephanopoulos and to the world on these shows, my Mea Culpa, my YouTube channel show, makes no difference, my TikToks, my reason for everything that I do is to ensure that no other American ever experiences the unconstitutional remand to a prison because they refuse to waive a First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Eighth Amendment, any of the constitutional amendments, ever. It's un-American, and it's not something that I can sit back and accept. And that's exactly what you did. So when Nancy Pelosi calls you and says to you, I'm proud of you, as am I. I understand better than most the struggle and the trauma that it causes. And you should actually just know that a lot of people feel that way, not just Nancy Pelosi.
Listen, man, I appreciate it. I've invested the better part of the past 7 years of my life into doing something about, what happened to my daughter. But my mission has certainly grown far deeper because of just all the amazing people I've met along the way and my love for this country, and realizing how much can be done if we take seriously the concept of voting and voting for the right people. And listen, I am so hopeful and optimistic as to what's going to happen in November, but I am also realistic. The next 55 days, I think, is what you said we have left. They're going to be tough. As he looks more and more like his chances of winning are slipping away further, he's going to get more violent in his rhetoric. His followers are going to do other things. And when he loses, I don't put it past him to try and incite additional acts of violence on this country. He doesn't love the country. He doesn't love it.
But he does not. But it's different this time. Last time he managed to do the things that he did, and the January 6th insurrectionists did the things that they did, and actions were not taken that would have prevented, because he was president of the United States. When he loses, he has even less power than he does now, because he's no longer even a candidate.
Fair point.
For the presidency. So any of these idiots, and many of them are anti-Trump themselves now, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, because their leaders are doing 16, 18 years in prison while he's at Mar-a-fucking-Lardo, all right, chowing down on burgers and ice cream while they're fucking rotting in prison, and he didn't even spend a single penny on trying to help any single one of them. But you know what? Look, since you brought up Kamala, you brought up the government and so on. One thing that I always found impressive about her as an alpha female is even last night when she spoke about her personal connection to the issue of gun violence, particularly during her work when she was a prosecutor. So how important do you think that it is for leaders to have a personal investment in issues like gun safety and gun protection?
I don't know that they have to have like a personal history with it, but they have to have an empathy gene. They have to care, even if it didn't happen to them, that it's something that happens to others. And she does. In her case, she does have some personal connections, which I also think were part of why she thought it was so important to come to the school building with me. Because A, she has the empathy gene, but B, she has seen the way gun violence impacts families and communities. And so what makes her just truly special is she has a long, long history trying to do something about this as an issue in this country and locally in her local community. And I think as a president, she's going to do incredible work of continuing to reduce the gun violence death rate in this country.
Fred, I asked you that question about their personal investment in issues. I asked that because In 2017, Steve Scalise, Congressman Steve Scalise, Republican, was shot at a baseball game. And I remember Republican, Democrat, Independent, all came to his aid. And they all started talking about gun control, gun safety laws. And somewhere along the line, because even after he was out of the hospital and he was okay, thank God, and returned back to the baseball field for the congressional games and so on, they're back to their same bullshit. They forget the fact, and I'm shocked that Scalise himself has not been more proactive.
I'm not.
To get some sort of
we need to stop being shocked about people like him. I'm not.
All right. Well, then you're right, and I'm wrong. I'm wrong.
You know, because listen, and think back to that time frame before 2018, and remember the power of the NRA back then. It was enormous. You know, the day after my daughter was killed, and I went to this vigil, and I got asked to speak when I was there. I remember just like literally standing in front of all of these people, and that was the first time that it really hit me. This was gun violence. And I remember walking into my home after that vigil that night, and I just said, I'm going to break the fucking gun lobby. That was my mission in life back then. And everything I did was all about taking on the NRA back then. And the good news is they are a shell of what they once were, but there are other entities, but they are a shell of what they once were. But Steve Scalise should have and could have become a leader. Senator Rick Scott should have and could have become a leader on the national level. After my daughter was killed when he was governor, I personally worked with him, as did the other families, and we passed incredible legislation in Florida only 3 weeks after that shooting. He signed it. He was part of the lead. He was one of the leaders in getting it done. But he went to DC and he wanted to leave it in the rearview mirror. That's what their politics dictates that they do. It dictates they lose their humanity, their desire to stop the next one. Hey, so be it. That's who they are. I'm no longer shocked. I just want to fucking fire every one of them and elect better people.
So, you brought up the NRA, and I agree with you. I mean, the NRA over the recent years have become so much more weakened. And of course, it's due to their scandals and the lawsuits. Yet, somehow or another, despite the fact that they've been weakened, they still remain a pretty powerful force in shaping gun policy. And I don't understand that. But do you see this now as an opportunity, now that they are weakened, to push for reforms? Or do you think that the gun lobby is just still too strong to overcome?
Well, so the NRA is not a political force anymore when it comes to legislation. There's another entity, the NSSF, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which is actually the trade group for the gun industry. They are now the powerhouse in Washington, D.C., and they are the ones putting money into campaigns and candidates. And they are the ones to pay attention to from a policy standpoint. But here's what the NRA did when they became politically weakened. And it's going to end up being their most powerful legacy. They started filing lawsuits all across the country. They started going after laws like the ones we passed in Florida and raising the age to 21. And they knew they were filing all these bad lawsuits that would eventually, if you keep pursuing it, they could work their way up to the Supreme Court. They filed the lawsuit against the state of New York in the Bruen case. They took on a law that was over 100 years old. It wasn't even a new law that people disagreed on. It was over 100 years old. But guess what? They were able to pursue it all the way up to the Supreme Court, And Justice Thomas, in a deciding opinion, wrote a horrific Supreme Court decision. That's going to be the most powerful legacy of the NRA, is all the lawsuits that they filed, because they have a Supreme Court now that stands with them.
Yeah, but look, I'm very well aware of that law and the Supreme Court decision and so on. However, while it's much easier now in New York, especially even New York City, to own a firearm, you basically can't take it anywhere. I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but what basically happens is you can't take a firearm on a bus. You can't take a firearm on a train. You can't take a firearm into, for example, like a Madison Square Garden. You can't take it into Central Park. You can't take it into any public buildings, into any city buildings. You can't. So basically, where are you going with it? I guess from your home to a restaurant.
Yeah, but
you can't take it into a movie theater.
And that's because New York continues to take measures for the safety of those in New York. It is the reason why per capita, their murder rate is not as high as, for example, red states, and actually going down. But the bigger thing about a case like Bruen in the Supreme Court is the impact on all gun laws. Because what Justice Thomas said was, any gun law going forward, there needs to be a historical precedent for it. Okay? And that has created all sorts of confusion and chaos, and has led to all sorts of new law challenges that are filtering their way up to the Supreme Court. And so the damage of that law is going to be with us for years and years to come on a national level.
Yeah. So look, again, since we're now dealing with two very, very different candidates, very stark contrast between two individuals, both seeking the same office, the office of the presidency. I want to just sort of bring out the fact that Trump, who I think that we will all acknowledge is a fucking moron, has gone so far. Listen to this one, because your opinion on this is really going to be priceless. Trump went so far as to suggest arming teachers as a solution to school shootings.
Yeah.
From your perspective as a father who lost a child to gun violence, how do you even respond to this sort of a suggestion?
Listen, with facts and the truth. All right. And what he's proposing is a wet dream for the gun lobby, because it's more gun sales. However, here are some facts. There's about 115,000 schools in America. 115,000. Up until 2018, there were 50 or fewer school shootings in America. Since 2018, we're between 300 and 400 per year. Okay? It's a fraction of the total number of schools. And there's two issues. A, why did we go from about 50 or less in 2018 and before per year to call it 400 per year since 2018? And I can go through the history of everything that led to that jump. But there are policy-driven reasons that it happened. And there's also policy-driven solutions to fix it. But here's the thing. Arming teachers isn't going to stop that small percentage of shootings from happening. It's like 0.03% of all schools. What it will do is guarantee more school shootings. You're going to have more guns on school campuses that will end up being discharged in emotional situations or by teachers who get afraid because there's a fight happening on a campus, or by a kid who learns who the teachers are with the guns and slams a book down on the floor to make a loud sound, because that's what kids do, and to scare a teacher. or by teachers who leave guns out accidentally, which, by the way, has already happened in the schools that allow armed teachers. And so it is inevitable. Instead of there being a few hundred of these a year, you're going to see more school shootings, more dead kids, more dead educators, not fewer. Arming teachers is a wet dream for the gun lobby, but it's a terrible solution.
So, it's very interesting because, like I said, Trump doesn't think. He just speaks. I want people to understand for a second here. Imagine that there is a school shooter. And imagine under Trump and the NRA and the national the firearm shootings. Imagine that all the teachers are actually armed. First of all, you're in a situation now where you need to be properly trained. All right? Just arming somebody and shooting at a target, a paper target, doesn't make you proficient at handling a firearm. So now there's a shooter in the hallway. And if you remember your school, as I remember mine, public school and private school, there's long hallways. And there could be 8 classes that are in that specific hallway. Let's even cut it down to 6. What's the difference? And the shooter is somewhere in the middle. And these 6 teachers come out, each with a firearm, and they're going to shoot at the intruder with the firearm. What's the likelihood that there's going to be friendly fire, that somebody's going to get killed as a direct result of this gun battle that's now taking place in a school with ricocheting bullets all over the place?
Michael, this isn't hypothetical for me. My daughter was killed in the hallway. I think there were a couple of others. Most kids were killed in a classroom. And what you just described, with the shooter standing in the middle of the hallway, happened. My daughter was hit with a single bullet turning into the stairwell. Here's the reality. The vibrations and the sounds, in the school, you have all those ceiling tiles. The amount of dust and debris that started raining down, and I guess smoke maybe from the bullets and everything, whatever. The visibility in the hallways was minimal. And you had these, I have the photos, just kids all over the place running through the hallways to safety, and teachers trying to get kids to a safe place. Teachers should be focused on getting kids to a place of safety. If they start pulling out guns to engage, they don't know who they're shooting at. They don't know if they're shooting at the right person. The sound echoes. Heck, the one armed person on my daughter's campus, he was actually indicted and charged for failure to defend and protect. And he ended up winning his case because he was able to prove, or I don't think he proved it, but whatever the case, a jury did, that he had no way of really knowing where the bullet sounds were coming from because of all the echoing effects. And so, people can talk all the nonsense they want, but there is a reality to this. There's a reason why in Uvalde, all those armed law enforcement people stood back, because there's a reality to when you're coming face to face with somebody else who has an AR-15. Trump got shot. They couldn't stop that. And someone else died. Now, Trump likes to talk about, his balloon. He's fine. But someone else was killed that day in an event that included the president of the United States. When there's a determined shooter.
Nobody talks about that guy who got killed that fire
No,
and so on. Most people
no.
can even tell you what his name is. In fact, all that they're talking about is the tampon that Donald had on his ear, on his right ear, and how he has miracle ear, how everything managed to grow back in his ear is bigger, better, stronger than ever. It's like the Bionic Man. He's got a $6 million ear. Bunch of horse shit.
But listen, when these moments begin, if you add in people whose sole focus is anything but security and they're not trained, you're bound to have more dead people, not fewer.
If you're like me, you're constantly thinking about safety of the people and the things that are most important to you and that you value the most. I mean, after years ago, this happened to me and my family. We got robbed. We had a house upstate in New York. One day we showed up, right? It was a holiday and everything was gone. And I knew that we needed to secure the home with the best. And my research led me to Simply Safe. I've trusted Simply Safe to protect my home for years now. And the level of security and customer care has been absolutely incredible. So first of all, I sleep better every night knowing Simply Safe's 24/7 monitoring agents are standing by. They're standing by to protect me. And if someone tries to break in, and then I just send an emergency help when I would need it the most. So I want you to have the same peace of mind that I do, and so many listeners experience every day, which is why I've partnered with Simply Safe to offer listeners, get a load of this, 20% off a system. And just simply visit simplysafe.com/mea culpa. And that's SIMPLISAFE.com/mea culpa. What I love most is that Simply Safe just keeps getting better. With exclusive LiveGuard protection, Simply Safe agents, they can act within 5 seconds. Get a load. 5 seconds of receiving your alarm, and they can even see and speak to intruders inside your home, warning them that the police are on their way. As a Simply Safe user, it's no surprise that Simply Safe has been named Best Home Security Systems by U.S. News and World Report for 5 years running, and the best customer service in home security by Newsweek. Protect your home this summer with 20% off any new Simply Safe system when you sign up for Fast Protect monitoring. Just visit simplysafe.com/mea culpa. That's simplysafe.com/mea culpa. And that's SIMPLISAFE.com/mea culpa. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Hence the point I was trying to make. His solution is ill thought out, and it's just plain stupid and wrong. So let me ask you this, because not a lot of people talk about social media and gun safety as far as the debate goes, especially on platforms like X, formerly Twitter, where it's used to spread misinformation and disinformation about shootings or policies.
Yeah.
How do you view the role of social media?
Listen, I am someone who believes we're at some point going to have to face the reality that we need a national standard on how social media should behave. Because it is used, while many people use it to say and communicate good, positive things, many don't. And dangerous things happen as a result. Social media does have a First Amendment obligation, but they also have an obligation to public safety. You can't walk into a movie theater and scream fire, for example. There are obligations to public safety. I do think social media has to somehow or another learn to police itself. That's number one. But number two, when it is clear that there's somebody on social media saying things that are clearly threatening or intending to project that something may happen, and social media's algorithms can easily figure that out, they should have an obligation to go straight to law enforcement.
I totally agree. I mean, look, you go on TikTok. So I have a TikTok show that I do at night just because I can't fall asleep, and it gives me the ability to try to educate some people. The other day, this girl who's a subscriber to the show and who actually reached out to me, she got banned from TikTok because she had a drink in her hand. The drink happened to have been a Coca-Cola. But TikTok has a very strict rule that you cannot have and you cannot consume alcohol on their platform. And so they banned her. 1, 2, 3. You don't have that on Twitter. And especially you don't have them on an issue as significant.
No, and you have an owner on Twitter now who is actually the past few days working exceptionally hard to project all the Second Amendment crazy stuff in his alliance with Donald Trump.
Yep. Yeah. So, hey, let me ask you this then, because, you know, there's a lot of discussions going on right now about red flag laws and so on. What's your thoughts about the implementation of these laws? And do you think that they're even enough? I mean, you know, temporarily removing from an individual, you know, their guns because of whether it's a perceived threat, an actual threat, or whatnot. You think that they're enough? You think the implementation of these laws are possible?
Listen, I wish they were stronger, and certain states have stronger versions of a red flag law than other states. What I can tell you is the states that have passed them, they're working. They are being used, and they are stopping acts of gun violence that were in the process of either happening soon or in the planning stage. You know, and an act of gun violence can be directed at others or self-directed. In the state of Florida, red flag laws have now been used, I think, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 times since we passed it in 2018. And of those times, there were, because there's always a due process component, many people were able to quickly get their weapons back, but a large number of them were not. And in many of the cases, they have been able to be extended. And so it's working. Acts of gun violence have been stopped in the state of Florida because we passed a red flag law after the Parkland shooting.
Yeah. So, you know, look, you know, one of the other things that we're seeing, and we talked about somewhat, is this rising political polarization, especially on the issue of especially the issue of guns. You think that there's still room for bipartisan efforts to address gun violence? Or do you think that this divide has just grown too wide?
I think with this current Congress, the answer is there is no room. The Republicans who serve in the House right now, every single one of them, well, not everyone. There are still some decent who just don't want to speak out against MAGA. And if MAGA,
they're more afraid of losing their position and their power than they are of speaking out. They're not the Adam Kinzingers. They're not the Liz Cheneys.
Correct. But if, in fact, MAGA suffers a tremendous defeat in this next election, then you'll see the sane, normal Republicans come out of the woodwork again. You may also see people run for office in this party again that are not MAGA. Right now, they have no place. But maybe if this election delivers a stinging defeat, we can listen. There's nothing better for America than a functioning two-party system. We don't have it right now.
Yeah. So let me then ask you this, because the one thing about whether it's social media or whether it's the 24/7 news cycles, the constant media coverage that revolves around shootings, particularly school shootings, how does that affecting your advocacy? on this issue. Do you think does the focus on it help push for change? Or do you think that it's just desensitizing the public, which is a fear that I have, that everything is becoming sort of normalized and we're becoming numb to it. We're becoming numb to the stupidity emanating from that gaping anus under Trump's nose. And everybody just, hey, it's just Donald Trump. It's just Trump being Trump. My fear is that with the constant media coverage, that we're just desensitizing the public. Unfortunately, it's another shooting at a school.
Yeah, you know what? I would say this. Since Trump, the abnormal has become normal, and the normal has, in many cases, become abnormal. I would say any genuine chance media has to talk about gun violence and its impact and what we can do about it, they should. And they should never, ever think that they should stop out of a fear of making it seem normal, because it has to stay as a voting issue. I don't think the issue is media coverage. In fact, when you look at polls, the majority of Americans agree with us, are horrified by this, and they do intend to make this a voting issue. The kind of sweeping it under the rug, treating it like it's just no big deal, comes from a minority of politicians that we've elected, the Republican Party. But Americans, when you talk to them about it across this country, they worry about the safety of their kids. They worry about the safety of their parents. They worry about the safety of their friends. And I don't think media should slow down in their coverage. They're covering the reality of what's happening. But since Trump, normal has become abnormal and abnormal has become normal.
Yeah. Well, Fred, look, as the hour comes to an end, I have one last question for you.
Sure.
I really want to ask you a personal question. Not that this entire conversation hasn't clearly been, as personal as anybody can imagine. But I want to ask you, what gives you hope that the United States can one day reach a place where the kind of tragedy that you and your family and others have suffered and make it a thing of the past? And then, what role do you think that future leaders, God willing, Kamala Harris and Ted Walz, will they play in making that vision a reality?
Listen, my hope comes from the fact that because I've been going across this country the past bunch of years, I've gotten to just meet people everywhere, red states and blue states, in politics and out of politics, in media and out of media. And the more I get to meet and talk to everyday people, listen, a guy like you, okay, who I never, ever would have thought we would have found an allegiance, but here we are. The more I get to talk to people, the more hope I have. The more I get to tune out the evil, demented folks who manage to get themselves elected for now, and believe that as a country, we are ready to move back into a more sane, rational place and into a place where we're ready to do things about these problems. America wants it. And as long as I feel that way, I have hope.
Yeah, well, listen, you're incredibly strong, Fred. Obviously, anytime that you need anything from me, you go on one of these tours, you want my my support, you got it. You want my presence, you got that. I'm so with you. And I was a gun owner before my felony. I was one of 1,000 people licensed here in New York to carry a firearm. But I went through torturous paperwork, background checks, FBI, and so on, in order to ensure that I am somebody who they believe should be permitted to carry a concealed firearm. I can't believe what's going on. I can't believe this fascination with firearms. I don't know whether it's coming from these games, these video games, or there's just something mentally wrong with us in this country, where I don't know, where comes from a bullet.
Let's do another podcast one day on it. It's coming from an industry that figured out brilliantly how to market these weapons. A long story short, in 1977, the NRA went through a dramatic change because gun sales were on the decline, because we no longer had a draft and hunting was on the decline. And through the 80s and 90s, they put a whole lot of work into a whole new model to sell guns to civilians. Let's never forget the day after 4 days after the Sandy Hook shooting, the NRA response to the Sandy Hook shooting was a phrase nobody ever heard before, but it feels like it's been with us forever. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. It is marketing that put us in this place. There is a cost of doing business on lives like my daughter's life, but it was marketing. It's not that we're more mentally ill than any other country. It's not that we can't handle video games better or worse than any other country, but we have an industry that is taking advantage of our fears and our rights to be free of gun violence. And that's what we should never forget.
Well, amen to you, Fred. Great seeing you, my brother. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.
I mean, I can't say it enough. We're all so sorry. We're with you, and we all just pray that it never happens again. So thank you again, Fred. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate you.